Hello everybody. So I'm going to comment on the mushroom murder trial again, and what I'm going to comment on is why everyone thinks that she's guilty. Now, most people haven't even been following the trial very much. It's not being live streamed, and they're relying on what the media says. But actually, most people first heard about it about 2 years ago when it was first reported. And that's where a lot of people got the idea. Now, not everybody followed it at the time, but it was a bit of a viral video. So this was before she was arrested, before she was charged with anything, before even anyone had died. It had been reported that 4 people got sick after eating a mushroom lunch, and the cook wasn't sick. So I go, oh, okay. So this news report, now it wasn't in the actual news, it was in, I believe, a current affair, but it might have been some other after news thing, and they went and followed her to her home, as they often do, and her reaction, and you see her getting out of the car. Her car drives in, they're waiting for her, and she gets out of the car and they hound her, and then they ask her questions, and initially she's refusing to answer the questions. And then she eventually decides that she will, and she starts crying, but there's no tears. And then she goes back to not answering. Now, that little bit was analysed, obviously, here in Melbourne, here in Victoria, around Australia, and around the world. So we have an international audience looking at that going, what the hell? And there's all these body language experts from America and different other countries, and they're all saying, what does this tell us? And based on that, they're going, oh, she's guilty. Oh, she tried to kill them. And then after that, we found out 3 died. 1 didn't. They didn't all die at the same time. All 4 were put in induced comas. 1 eventually woke up, 3 didn't. But, so she eventually had 3 people die, and after that, so it was quite some time before they charged her with murder. Now, as far as I know, she's never been in jail, so they charged her with murder but didn't put her in jail. Now, we can speculate as to if that means she's guilty or not. Essentially, that's really more to do with if she's a flight risk. So, if she's a risk of flying away to some other country, or even in some cases flying away to some other state, then they might put her in jail to prevent her from flying away. But as she lives in the middle of nowhere, I think it's 180 kilometres east of Melbourne, and no real prospects of going anywhere, I guess they thought she was okay. So I'm not aware that she's in jail or has ever been in jail. She was arrested, but to my knowledge, she's not in jail. Now, some people can speculate that means she's not guilty, and it might do. I think when they're very confident that someone's guilty, they do put them in jail and keep them there. But it's also to do with whether they're likely to fly away. So in some cases, they let them out, but you lose your passport, or you lose your car, or you lose whatever. But anyway, the thing is, most people who watched that thought she was guilty. Now, there were a few people that weren't sure, because we know that A Current Affair and shows like that, they like to drum it up and make people look more guilty than they are. But we had all these behavioural, body language and tonal experts that looked at it, and they all said, oh no, she's hiding something, she's guilty. And it was quite unanimous, and we rely on those things nowadays. So all these people were saying, all right, well, we don't know what she's guilty of, but she's guilty of something. And considering that we've got 3 people dying and a 4th one being going into a coma, we're assuming that she is guilty. So people have commented to me and they just do not care what I've said. Okay, they don't care about the logic. Because in their mind, the logic is, the guy that has survived, he's obviously fingered her. He said, oh no, she tried to kill us all. and must have hated them, and there was some conniving way. Maybe she gets custody of the kids, maybe it hurts her ex-husband by killing off his parents. You know, we all know that, you know, father-in-law, well, certainly mother-in-law, goodness. You know, you hear so many stories about people, their mother-in-law that just hate them. It's quite common. And, she wanted to kill her husband, of course. It was obvious. There's some motive there. Doesn't matter what it is. You know, she obviously killed them. There's no question. There's no doubt. We know. We don't need to see evidence. We don't need to see facts. We don't need to see the court case play out. She's obviously guilty. Of course she is. And the thing is, there were all these debates about it. Well, years before the trial was held. The trial, it wasn't held until 2025, 2 years later. In fact, that's fairly quick for murder trials to be that quick. But, we knew she was guilty before we heard even a second of evidence. Before they dropped the 4 charges related to the ex-husband. I mean, police charged her with trying to kill her ex-husband 4 times in the previous 2 years. Goodness. She's so guilty, it's ridiculous. I mean, why would you don't even need a court case. You just hang her up to a pole and lynch her. That's what everyone was saying. So, we've got to just realise that a lot of that stemmed from that initial interview. And I think, like, when we look at this interview, and this is the thing, a current affair are known to manipulate, to make people look more guilty than they are. And I think a lot of the people commenting on that, the Americans, they're not aware of that show. They don't look at a current affair and see how dodgy they can be when they try to interview people. They're quite well known for it. They do gotcha moments. They go, ha-ha, gotcha. And look, maybe some of them are guilty, but it's quite well known in Australia that they make people look more guilty than they are. So if you're being chased by a current affair, it doesn't matter what your reaction is, they're going to make it look like you're guilty. You know, then there's never, like 100% of cases where they've chased somebody, they've made them look guilty. How many of the people were actually guilty? I mean, some were, but we're talking about, 20, 30%? You know, I'm not sure of the number, but it's not 100%, and it's not even half. So it's a small fraction. In fact, current affair has been in a lot of trouble for hounding people and for perverting the course of justice and all that sort of stuff. And we've got to realise, if there wasn't that video out there, would people think she was so obviously guilty? And the simple answer is probably not. Now, it wasn't just that video, obviously, because after that, and after all the speculation related to that video, there was a bit of a media frenzy. And now every newspaper, every TV channel, every media outlet have all said that she's guilty. Nobody's defending her. Nobody's suggested she could be innocent. There's been no conversation along those lines. She's obviously guilty. Now, this may remind you of a case a few years back where there was a Catholic cardinal known as George Pell, and he's passed away now. So he was a cardinal who famously refused to investigate allegations of child sex abuse, and even when he knew they were guilty, he refused to take action. So he helped to cover it up. He definitely did do that, by the way. So there's not really any doubt that he helped to cover it up. Why he helped to cover it up, a lot of people said, he must be hiding something himself. And he was charged with, I think, 12 different things, different court cases. And he was found not guilty, 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 not guilty. Hung jury, mistrial. Aha! And there was one. There was a case where there were 2 choir boys, and they had gone on record, and one of them had said he was guilty and the other one didn't want to comment. And the one that didn't want to comment, on his deathbed, said he's not guilty, that didn't happen, we made the whole thing up. And then he died. And they still went ahead with the trial, in spite of having one of the people that it was alleged to be against saying it didn't happen on their deathbed. And we usually take deathbed confessions as being truthful. It's pretty difficult to lie when that's your last words. So we went ahead with the trial, and in the trial, all the media were saying, oh, he's guilty of sin. And we were all led to believe that the one that died had also said he was guilty, but it was the other way around. The one who died said he wasn't guilty, and that they'd made the whole thing up. And they had reason to make it up. They wanted to hurt the Catholic Church because there was real things going on, but just not by the Cardinal. The Cardinal had hid some of it and protected guilty parties, but he himself wasn't guilty of doing anything himself. So they did that. They went to the trial, and then he was found, on the second version of the trial, he was found guilty. First version was a hung jury. Second one, he was found guilty. And a lot of people celebrated. They said, finally, justice. And then he launched an appeal, and then that appeal led to another appeal and another appeal. And then he was found not guilty on appeal. And the reason that he was found not guilty, the media just ignored it. But the reason that he was is because the High Court found that no jury could have found him guilty based on the evidence. The evidence proved that he was not guilty, had no possibility of guilt. So it was overturned. And the media still says that he was guilty. His accuser still says he was guilty. He's dead now. They still say he was guilty. And this is an interesting thing. The amount of media bias in that case is one of the highest I've ever seen. And the amount of media wrongness in that case is one of the highest I've ever seen. If you ask people, was Cardinal Pell guilty? Now, there was a few people that said he wasn't, but the vast majority said he was guilty. Talk to people on the street, they'd say, oh, guilty of sin. They'd still say he's guilty of sin. Now, if you compare it with this woman who's not a cardinal, not well known, doesn't have the church behind her, nothing like that. You ask people if they think she's guilty, everyone says she's guilty. They all know, of course they do. And if you look at how the media has handled the trial, they've been reporting on what the prosecution have said. Now, even during the prosecution phase, there are cross-examinations. They haven't reported on it. It's as if, whatever the defence says in cross-examination isn't important. And for example, the media correctly reported that the only survivor, Ian Wilkinson, said, oh, she served us on different plates. There were one coloured plate for the 4 people being poisoned and one plate for her. Yeah, and he did say that. But what they missed was in cross-examination, they said, could you have sat anywhere? And he said yes. He said we could have sat anywhere. So in other words, that plate wasn't relevant. There was also, they missed the fact that there were multiple other witnesses that said there was no other plate. There was no orange plate. They were all served on grey plates. They missed that, you know. Media just thought that wasn't relevant. We didn't need to hear that. Why do we need to hear such a thing? And the media have all said, oh, she cooked 6 separate beef Wellingtons, as if that's such an easy thing to do. Media have not replayed how incredibly difficult that is, and how I would say it's pretty much impossible. And I'll just explain a beef Wellington for you. If you cook a beef Wellington, you need to get the ingredients and all this sort of stuff. It costs about $150 to get all the ingredients. This is not a cheap meal. It's a very expensive meal. And probably take you 2 or 3 weeks to get everything together. I mean, that's how long it took me when I cooked it. And I don't know if she's a better cook than me. I'm not a terrible cook, I don't think, but maybe she's better. And so it took me about 2 or 3 weeks. And then on the day, so I start cooking about 4 o'clock. It's finished by about 7 or 8. That's how long it takes. So if you were doing this for lunch, let's say you have lunch at 12, you're going to start cooking at about 8. Now, maybe she's better than me. She'll start preparing everything at 9 a.m. Now, and if you're having lunch guests, you're probably going to have them come around at 12. You might eat at 12:30 or 1. I don't know what time they were eating. But whatever time, you're essentially going to say, all right, you're going to have breakfast. You've got kids there. You're going to have breakfast with the kids maybe 8:30. Immediately after breakfast, you're going to start preparing it. Is that believable? Yes. You could cook a beef Wellington on a single day, preparing it during breakfast or preparing it after breakfast. You might have had some preparation beforehand. You've gathered everything over a few weeks, which is what she testified she did. That all makes sense. And the thing is, and I'm just going to clarify this, where the prosecution doesn't reject the evidence, we're going to say that both sides agreed. And again, the media are reporting on everything the prosecution's saying. So the prosecution are not denying that she planned this in advance. There's no dispute. There's no dispute that she spent all day doing it. Nobody has disputed that she has a normal kitchen. She doesn't have 3 fridges. She doesn't have 3 ovens. She doesn't have an extremely big oven. So, we're just going to say that. So if she was cooking it one single meal, and in other words, everybody ate the beef Wellington, then, and everybody had the Death Cap mushrooms in it, yeah, you could do it on one day. No problem. Look, it's a rush, but you can definitely do it. I've done it. Well, I did it at night. I've never tried to do it for lunch. I mean, goodness, I would never do a meal that complicated for lunch, but, people do. If you want to show off, you do it at lunch. And look, when I did it, I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't put mushrooms in mine. Beef Wellington doesn't have to have mushrooms in it, but you can put mushrooms in it. And the thing is, when you're doing it, the ingredients are going to be all over the place. The ingredients, it's going to cook more in one side than the other. You're going to have to keep turning it. You have to stir it exactly right. I never once, I only did it twice, but I couldn't get it to be evenly cooked throughout. Some bits would be overcooked, some bits would be undercooked, some bits that have more of the prosciutto or the other thing. And you've got to layer it. You can't look inside it while it's cooking, or this is something that you'd have to be really high-end cook to get it right. Or you'd have to do it a lot of times. As she said, this is her first time cooking. It's her first time cooking a complicated dish like this. This is, for me, it's one of the most, I'd actually say it was the most complicated dish I've ever made. And, there are more complicated dishes out there, let's be honest, but this is right up there. I cooked thrice cooked duck once, so 3 times cooked duck, and that was easier. It was complicated, that's pretty scary, you've got to get it right to the second. But this was a very complicated meal. It's doable for lunch, but it is a rush. And it would take up the whole kitchen, take up the whole oven, and if you're refrigerating anything, your whole fridge, even if you've got a pretty big fridge, it's going to be full up with all the stuff you've prepared for it. She had a dehydrator. You don't need a dehydrator, but she had one. That would have added even more complexity to it. And so this is the sort of dish where you can make mistakes. And it's the sort of dish where Death Cap mushrooms, which look exactly like normal mushrooms, could easily sneak into it. Particularly your first time doing it. It's a complicated dish. You're trying to poison someone. So that's argument number 1. That's the defence's argument, that that's what she did. Now let's look at the prosecution argument about what they claim she did, which is that they claim that she split it up into 6 beef Wellingtons. Now we say 6 because even though there are only 5 guests, Simon, her husband, her estranged husband, they're separated, they're not divorced, so we can't say ex-husband, that he was meant to come, but an hour beforehand he said he wasn't. Now, the reason why she would have still had to cook that is because it takes more than an hour to cook it. So, in other words, she had to have had the 6 all ready to go and already in the process of cooking when he said no. And that therefore means that we should have had a complete, if not completely wrapped, it might have not been completely cooked, but a complete beef Wellington, albeit a small one, that was in the bin somewhere. No one's ever found that, but maybe she hid the evidence, who knows. And the other thing is, we should have found evidence that there were individual beef Wellingtons. We haven't found that. And there also should be one separate section of the leftovers that doesn't contain any Death Cap mushrooms. And the thing is this, she said that she ate the same meal, but then she gave it to her children but scraped off the mushrooms because they don't like mushrooms. The version that the children ate also had Death Cap mushrooms in it. Now, wouldn't it be a bit irresponsible, unless you want to kill your kids too? You're risking that. There'll still be the residue in there because it's a paste. So she's done her best to scrape it off, but it's not very accurate, is it? So, yeah, it's not really very accurate with that. Now, if she was cooking this is what would have to happen in order for this to be possible. Firstly, she'd need to have a big enough oven to cook 6 individual portions in. Now, in my oven, I could cook 2. But if you had a really big oven, like my mother-in-law does, you could cook 3. They've got an exceptionally big oven. Really unusual for people to have them. I don't think I've ever met anyone else who had one big enough that could fit 3 in at once. Alright, so if you're cooking it with 2, you're going to need to do 3 batches. If you've got a really large oven, like my mother-in-law, you'd do it in 2 batches. Alright, so how much extra time does that add? Well, the cooking time is 45 minutes. So you're at least adding 45 minutes to the meal time. So if you, instead of cooking it starting at 8:30, you'd have to start at, say, 7:45 minimum. Probably a fair bit earlier than that, and I'll get into that later, but that's if you're doing just 2 batches. If you're doing 3 batches, you're going to have to be starting at 7 a.m. That means that you're going to be having to do it while you're making breakfast. That means you're going to have to be getting up at 6 a.m. to prepare a meal for lunch. It's a bit much, really, isn't it? Unless you're having a really late lunch. And you're going to have to say to the kids, oh, sorry, I'm too busy cooking the beef Wellingtons because I need to have them separate. There is no recipe in existence that says that you would have 6 separate beef Wellingtons. There's no such thing. It's already a complicated dish. That would add a level of complexity that only professional chefs would have any chance of doing. She's not a professional chef, but let's say she did. Say she's a marvellous chef. She's done it like this, done the 6 separate ones, probably more realistically 3 separate batches. She's starting at least at 6 a.m. and going the whole time from 6 a.m. until lunch. Then they come, she'd be absolutely exhausted from spending that much time preparing and cooking. And realistically, I'm only adding 45 minutes per batch. But I think realistically, because you have to prepare them separately, I think we can probably add a bit more than that. I'm going to say, for me, if I was doing it, and again, I don't know her cooking skill, but you'd be probably talking about 2 a.m, 3 a.m. What? So she's not sleeping, and she's doing this all night long. Oh, okay, so she could have done some of the preparation the night before. Okay, all right, so she's done it the night before. She's had dinner, finished, putting the kids to bed. 8:30 p.m. She's probably going to stay up till about, say, 10:30, 11, maybe even 12. She's given herself 3.5 hours to prepare, and then she's just going to put the 3 batches in the oven, one after each other, on the day. But could you get it done at night? I don't think you could. The preparation would take too long. For 6, absolutely would. You'd be going from, let's say, 8:30 p.m. until 2 a.m, maybe even 3 a.m. to prepare it. And then on the day, you're still going to have to do 3 lots of 45 minutes. That's 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's just for the cooking time, with 3 batches. Assuming you're having 3 batches, because I'm going to assume she doesn't have an extra big oven. But maybe she has two extra big oven, she does 2 batches. And I'm assuming she doesn't have 2 ovens either. She has 2 extra big ovens, oh, she can do it all at once. But I'm going to assume she doesn't, because nobody has that. I mean, unless you're actually, like, you're an actual professional chef, or you've got a house with 15 people in it and you're cooking for 15 people. I mean, if you were talking about a hostel, they might well have 2 ovens, even 2 big ovens. But this is just a regular house with just 3 people living in it. Why are you having 2 extra big ovens, let alone 3? You're not going to. That would be a luxury that you just wouldn't have. So that's the thing. So she's prepared it all night the night before, gone to bed really late, she's tired, she gets up in the morning, prepares breakfast for them all, and then still has a minimum of 2 hours and 15 minutes of cooking time. Plus she's going to have to, it's going to be more than that actually, because she's going to have to put it in the fridge in between time. So the first batch goes in the fridge, And then when the second batch is cooked, that goes in the fridge too. And then after the third batch is cooked, you then reheat the first and the second batches to bring them up to temperature. Talk about complicated. And that's going to take 3 hours. So you're still going to be starting at 9 a.m. in spite of doing it all the night before. That's a lot of effort. Not so, well, you want to kill people, that's what you've got to do. You've got to do all this stuff. If you want to get somebody killed, you've got to do it all. All right, understand that. And then in spite of doing all that, her only way of telling that which ones were poison and which one wasn't, only 1 out of the 6 wasn't poison, was that she, at the end, put it on a different coloured plate. That's what the prosecution wants people to believe. That she went through that whole thing having no idea which bits were poisonous and which bits weren't, because remember, this paste was made weeks before, and then she puts it in there, and she doesn't mark the pastry. The pastry was not marked. The evidence is no doubt that the pastry was not marked. It was all the same, and she did that just so she could poison it. You're going to kill somebody, you're going to go to it. Okay, I can understand it. Now let's consider an alternative for what she could have done if she was going to poison them. Let's just say instead she's gone to one of their houses with a bag of death cap mushrooms in it, sitting in her handbag, and she just goes there, says hello, hey, how are you doing? All that sort of stuff. Oh, I'm just going to get something out of the fridge. When she gets something out of the fridge, they've probably got mushrooms sitting in the fridge. People just sit in there for a while. This happens. She swaps them out, and she puts the death caps in instead of the other mushrooms. Or she might have even said, if they didn't have mushrooms, said, hey, I've got some mushrooms. Want to try some? Oh yeah, sure. Then they cook them. It's better to swap it out, but you could even risk giving it to them. Then they cook it, and then when they die, it's an accidental death. If you wanted to kill all 4, they don't all live together. They're in 2 different houses, but you could still do it because she had no motive to kill them. So why the hell is she doing it? She didn't just not have a motive, but she liked them. They liked her. They were her support network. They liked her more than they liked Simon, the husband, their actual relative. They liked the in-law more than they liked the actual relative. That happens sometimes. And that's established. Nobody's disputing that. Nobody's disputing that they liked her. So prosecution has not disputed that. So anybody who's got in their head and thinks, oh, they don't like each other, well, you're just plain wrong. They do. They did. And that's agreed by both sides. So we don't need to debate that. That's clearly established that they liked each other. She had no motive. Now, I know they say, oh, well, you don't have to have motive, but you kind of do, unless it's a random killing. If it's a random killing, you don't need to have motive. Somebody shoots up a school, what's the motive? And the motive, even if there is one, it's not likely to be against the people who are killed. It'd be more of a general motive. People that, drive their car around the city and just randomly hit people. They don't know the people they're hitting. Of course there's no motive. And sometimes even you get ones where people just go crazy. Now, this was a case where she knew them, and so therefore the random idea is a bit silly. And this was also a case where she had to have weeks of planning and she had to prepare the meal for several hours on the day. You need to put that poison in several hours earlier into the dish, if not the night before or a few weeks before. So the idea that this was a random thing is nonsensical. So therefore you don't need a motive. Now, in theory, I was like, okay, you don't need a motive. In theory, we found guilty. In theory. It's a stretch. But it can happen. But then you've got the issue of how complicated that dish already is with a normal version of it. And then we have how complicated it is doing 6 versions of it. And again, there's no version of the recipe that allows for 6 versions of it, 6 to be read at once. She said it was on recipe tins. Nobody has disputed that it was on recipe tins. So recipe tins has a recipe that she followed. And when you're doing it the first time, you're going to follow the recipe. You might change just one tiny thing, but you're not going to make such massive changes as to change it from 1 meal to 6, which is a massive change. That's something you do if you've cooked it 20 times or you're a professional chef and you're trying to experiment. It's not something you do your first time. And again, she could have just gone to their house and given them some death cat mushrooms. Much easier. They would have cooked it, they would have died, she wouldn't have gotten in any trouble. And you're in a country town, Leongath is a very rural town, you're not going to be leaving the doors locked very much, certainly not during the day. They could go out for a few hours, she just sneaks in, she's a relative, it's not suspicious, she just replaces the mushrooms with, or the edible mushrooms with death caps. And this is the thing, she had motive to kill her husband. There's no doubt about that. You know, and you're going through a messy divorce, that's pretty normal to have motive. You don't normally kill them, but you normally perhaps want to. And if her husband had died from cooking death cat mushrooms, then I'd say, yeah, she might have killed him. And if he died and he cooked it with his family, yeah, it could have been her. She might have swapped the mushrooms out. And this is the thing that they haven't officially mentioned, but I'm thinking, is that what if he got into her fridge? I have no doubt that he wants to kill her too. What if he got into her fridge and she had regular mushrooms sitting in the fridge because she was preparing for this meal? She probably didn't tell him that's what she'd done, but she was preparing the meal. She had mushrooms sitting in the fridge. That's what people do. Have a little Glad wrap over the top. And he goes in there, swaps them out for some death caps. She hasn't said that he did it, but maybe he did. So that's kind of easier. It's got a motive, and it's plausible, had opportunity. Could have much more likely to do that than her making 6 separate parcels of beef Wellington. Much more likely that he went in there and broke into the fridge. Now, if he did that, his aim was to kill her, not his parents, because he doesn't want to kill his parents either. But what if he aimed for her to just cook it for herself? If their kids don't eat mushrooms, he would know that she would scrape them off the plate, or so she would cook the death cat mushrooms for herself for a meal. Presumably she cooks mushroom meals all the time. She's probably a bit clumsy, doesn't check things very much. It seems pretty obvious. People would just say, oh, unfortunate accident. And Erin would have died, and Simon would have been the perpetrator that nobody would have suspected. And this is the thing. What if that is what happened? But instead of her cooking it for herself, she cooked it for his family. And what if he only found out about that a couple of hours before? So she only told people, I think, the day before, and he probably would have gone, oh no, I've got to tell my parents not to go because she's going to put death cat mushrooms in there. But then he'd be thinking, no, I can't do that because it'll arouse suspicion. And so he couldn't tell them that. He probably tried to, but he couldn't think of how to do it. And maybe he's thinking, all right, she's probably thrown them out. It's probably all right. Gone through a million thoughts, and then there are the death cat mushrooms and they die. What if that's what happened? What if the aim was not Erin to kill Simon's parents, but the aim was for Simon to kill Erin? And the aim was, of course, get her out of the way. He hates her guts. So much animosity that she tried to kill him 4 times. I'm going to assume that he at least said that she did. Maybe she did. Maybe she did try to kill him 4 times in the previous 3 years. They've dropped the cases. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know how much evidence there was for that. But he's at least gone to the level of convincing the DPP to put that on her charge sheet. And so you're going to have to say that something happened. If something happened 4 times in the past 2 or 3 years by her against him, I'm going to say either he did something against her as well, or at the very minimum he wanted to. So if somebody tries to kill you 4 times in 3 years, you're going to want to kill them. Now maybe, however she did it, maybe she's bigger than him, she overpowered him, and then, whatever happened. We don't know the details because those charges were dropped. But whatever the case there, Maybe he thought, all right, I better kill her before she kills me. Maybe that was his motive. And therefore the aim was to kill her. And he would be horrified that she actually went through with the meal and it had the death cap mushrooms and it killed both of his parents and his aunt and sent his uncle into a coma. The level of guilt he would feel from that would be astronomical. Now you might think, okay, if that's the case, why aren't the prosecution going after him? They kind of can't go after both. Even if she's found not guilty, and I think she will be found not guilty, they can't then go ahead and prosecute him. So, and he would know that. I think most people would know that. So he's going to get away with it, assuming he did it. There's really no, like whether she's found guilty or not guilty, there's no way that he will face any prosecution. He'll be going, all right, well, didn't kill her. Phew, at least I got away with it. I'm sorry that my family members have died. And he would think that was his punishment. That he's had his mum and his dad and his aunt have all died. And that's the thing. If you're in that level of a domestic argument, he's going to justify that. On the other hand, yeah, sure. She would justify killing him if she did. Would she justify killing them? I'd say not. And this is the other thing. We don't know how much he liked his parents or his aunt and uncle. He may well have hated them. If they liked her more than him, but we're going a bit down a rabbit hole there. The thing is, this is the thing. The idea that he had planted the mushrooms into her kitchen is more likely than the idea that she cooked 6 separate beef Wellingtons for lunch. First time doing it in an ordinary kitchen. The idea that he went in there and just simply swapped the mushrooms, edible mushrooms, for death cap mushrooms, without her knowing, aiming to kill her, probably just her, is a lot more plausible, a lot more believable. Now, it wasn't tested in court, we can't consider that, but it is more believable, it's more likely. Now, the other alternative is that she just cooked it for them, aiming to impress them, but she stumbled a bit and ended up making a lot of mistakes. I mean, I think having a dehydrator is a massive mistake. You don't need that. And, I mean, the prosecution argument was, she'd lied to them about cancer, knowing that they would take that to their graves. I'm sorry, no. If I know that I'm going to kill somebody, I'm going to tell them all my worst secrets. I mean, you see that in the movies. You know, a villain will go, the villain doesn't go, ha 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 ha, I have cancer, knowing that that's a lie. You know, you don't have the Joker saying that to Batman. No, they reveal their secrets. They don't always. But if they're going to say anything, it'll be some secret truth, not a lie. And she didn't tell them before the lunch. She told them before the lunch, well, that's different, but she told them at the lunch. And they had no way of telling anybody, and they wouldn't have told anybody, except for that one person survived. So he got to tell them this story that then turned out to be false. No, that's not believable. Now, she definitely did say that, but that's not a motive. That has nothing to do with it. That just says, well, she does lie, and we know she lies. And we can't necessarily trust some of her statements. That one was definitely a lie, and she definitely lied about, what was the second one, about having a dehydrator. But the other ones that were claimed to be calculated deceptions weren't. They were not proven, they were suggested. And they were irrelevant as well. They were not relevant to finding her guilty. And therein is the problem. And I hark back to the Cardinal Pell case, that if she is found guilty, it's not based on the evidence. It'll be based on the media hyperbole and based on that original interview, which made her look guilty. And it was made for memes, for viral, for making money. It's something that A Current Affair are known for, and they've gotten a lot of trouble for it over the years. And because they did that, it's turned everybody against her. And I'd say it's turned a lot of people against different people who they've targeted over the years. A small proportion of them were guilty of something, but most weren't. And it turned people against them, at least if you believed Current Affair. Because over the years we all became a bit bored of it and stopped believing it and just thought, oh, well, this is just someone being a bit stupid. It's a bit like, oh, well, you go to Jerry Springer, they don't have that anymore, but they go to a show like that and expect that to be purely factual. It's not. It's just to sell, to get people excited. And then we have an actual criminal trial based on it. Well, we shouldn't be considering that. And I know that everybody out there is considering that. They're all saying, oh no, it's a Current Affair. You saw what she said, you saw what the Americans said about her. Oh, she's clearly guilty. Blah, blah, blah. Of course she's guilty. Why else would she talk like that? Why else would she move like that? They said that she was guilty. Well, they said she was lying. She may well have been lying. But what was she lying about? Was she lying about what she killed them? Or was she lying about, oh no, this is a Current Affair, I don't want to be on camera? You know, which I think most people in Australia would know. They would be horrified by a Current Affair being done. Is that the reaction? And I think most people, if they suddenly were confronted with a Current Affair for any reason, would be like, oh no, I can't be here. And then she's decided, oh, she will talk to them. Which may have been a mistake. But what do you do? Like, I've seen so many Current Affair gotcha moments, and everybody they paint to be guilty. Doesn't matter what you say or do, they will make you look guilty. And that's just what they do when they do that sort of thing. I've never seen a case where they weren't trying to make someone look guilty. I've never seen a case where someone managed to say something in the right way such that they didn't look guilty. And I think we should be taking that on board. Saying we can't trust that a Current Affair did that in an honest way, because they have such a long history of not doing it in an honest way, of manipulating it. And I don't think that we can rely on that. The other thing is, like, in the actual court case, we didn't have the gotcha moments. They dropped the charges against what related to the supposed murder attempts against her husband in the 2 or 3 years previously. And that dropped very significant, because that was the only way that they could establish motive. So they gave up on that. And I think you'd find prosecution and defence both agreed before the trial, as they usually do. They would agree on whether she was guilty or not. This is a very common practice in law, and it's very rare that the lawyers will actually be at loggerheads. They'll usually say, all right, well, I think they're guilty, I think they're not guilty. All right, probably most likely they're guilty, and that's what they would say. In this case, they'd probably say, all right, well, probably she's not guilty, but I just want to test this one thing. And they would have that. And they would have had all these discussions amongst themselves in which they agree. And the other thing is the prosecution, because of the type of case, they're required to drop them if there's no reasonable prospect of success, except that they're not allowed to drop them if it's in the public interest to keep it going. So essentially all murder cases and some other cases have to go ahead no matter what, even when they're guilty, even when they're not guilty. And that's the thing, most murder cases are found not guilty because they know they're not guilty before they even start. So they go ahead with them knowing they're not guilty. And so you can imagine the prosecution and defence getting together and saying, hey, look, I know she didn't do it, but we're going to go ahead with this. We're going to focus on this. We think there's some chance we need to explore this. Yeah, fair enough. It'll be very amicable, very friendly. This is what they do. So, if you had that happen, you might think that's a waste of 9 weeks. That's a waste of 9 weeks in the courtroom to prove that. But the aim is so that you people, everybody sitting out there in the public who's been misled by a Current Affair, who's been misled by that interview, who's been misled by different media reports, both paper, written and on the TV and of course online, that all of that, you've been misled, and this is showing to you that it happened. Why didn't they show it live? I don't know. They rarely show things live. Yeah. But I think that's the whole purpose of it. I think it's fairly obvious that's the case. Now, that's not to say she won't be found guilty. Cardinal Pell was. I think if she is found guilty, she should appeal, and I think she should win on appeal. I can't guarantee she'd win on appeal because that's a very high burden, but I think she would. I think it's so absurd for her to be found guilty that she would probably win on appeal. And that's, I mean, I can't see any scenario in which she's guilty. I can see scenarios in which she's found guilty, but that's only because of media manipulation, which is illegal, but happens. Like the jury is not allowed to find someone guilty when the evidence says they're not. They're not allowed to find someone guilty when it's purely based on media lies and manipulations. But sometimes they do. They did with Cardinal Pell. And I think that there is a chance that they will in this case. And that's unfortunate, but you know, that's why I'm not 100% certain. But look, I'd probably say I'm very confident that she'll be found not guilty. But we'll see. There was always that chance of the jury getting it wrong. Jury misconduct in Brittany Higgins' case. We've had a few examples of juries getting it wrong and making mistakes. And of course, I don't know all the ins and outs of what's going on because I'm like everybody else. I'm relying on media who are quite manipulative. And you know, it takes a lot to look through it and to see what they're lying about. But ultimately, they would have to decide, did she cook 1 beef Wellington or 6? If she cooked 1, she ate it and she's not guilty. If she cooked 6, she didn't eat it. Well, she still might have eaten it even if she cooked 6. But if she cooked 6, then there's a decent chance she's guilty. I wouldn't say it's quite certain that just by cooking 6 she's guilty, but you certainly need that to have any chance of finding her guilty. So, and you need to be not just a possibility of her cooking 6, you need to be absolutely certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she definitely cooked all 6. And you can't say that. And even if you did say that, then you look at the other issues. Then you look at the things that the prosecution talked about. The prosecution talked about that without ever establishing that she definitely cooked separate meals. And unfortunately, based on the evidence, she couldn't have cooked separate meals. It's not just a possibility, it's not a possibility. It's not something that was possible to do. And this is why everyone gets it wrong, because I think a lot of people also don't realise how complicated beef Wellington is. I'd like to see somebody go up there and cook 6 beef Wellingtons, 5 that are poisoned, and you can use whatever else you want to use that instead of being poisoned, and 1 that's not, and make sure they're not contaminated in a normal kitchen in 3 hours. And I'd like someone to do it who's not a professional chef, who's never cooked it before, who's in an ordinary kitchen for lunch. I'd like to see if anyone could. I certainly couldn't. I've already cooked it twice. I'm more experienced than the average person. I'm going to say nobody could do it. And I'm going to say it couldn't be done, even if you were brilliant, because you just don't have a fridge that big and you don't have an oven that big. You don't have enough time. So it can't be done. You can't secure everything. If you were in a professional kitchen, a restaurant kitchen, for a big restaurant, you might have 3 or 4 ovens, you might have 3 or 4 fridges, you'll have different workbenches, you might have 12 or 15 chefs, you'll have one chef work on the safe one, and you have other ones work on the poisonous ones. Well, you can definitely do it in a professional kitchen, and you could do that probably in less than 2 hours. But we're not talking about a professional kitchen. We're not talking about a professional chef. So, you know, unless this was all done in a secret professional kitchen at a restaurant that we don't know about, she's not guilty. It's not even a possibility. That's it from me. Bye bye now.